When the Amazon Prime series Secret Level was announced, I was only really interested in one episode. I have either never played or don't care about most of the series represented, the Pac-Man episode just looked really weird, and since I hadn't realized they were making a Spelunky episode, which was pretty good by the way, the only episode that interested me personally going into the series, and the only episode I was planning to watch, was Mega Man Start. And it was pretty good. I have my nitpicks. I'm not a fan of what I'm going to call the DCEU-ification of the character designs. Mega Man doesn't need a visor, and why is Bomb Man 4 stories tall? I get you want a David versus Goliath dynamic for the sake of spectacle and platforming, but I think the impact of Mega Man's forced fratricide is less personal when Bomb Man's an inhuman behemoth. It just reads as insecure that nobody will take it seriously in the current year unless it tries to be realistic TM, instead of fully and boldly embracing the original aesthetic. If you wanted to make something dark and serious that has kaiju bots, Mega Man X is right there, guys. You didn't have to adapt classic. But that aside, I do think they really nailed the characterization of Rock and Dr. Light. If this team worked on the aesthetic a little and took story notes from the comics and manga, this could be developed into a pretty great film or series. Which, given what they're doing with Warhammer, I kinda think that the whole point was to be a series of backdoor pilots to test the viability of IP to milk. But there's one more thing that this episode of Secret Level did that absolutely floored me. At the very end, one little thing left me absolutely shook, flabbergasted, gobsmacked even. It came to me as an enormous, earth-shattering shock that this adaptation of Mega Man used actual f***ing Mega Man music. It was just during the suit-up montage, and it's the Wily Castle and title themes from Mega Man 2, which are like the Mega Man music of all time. There was once a time where if you asked me what video game music I thought was the most covered and remixed on the internet, my answer would have been Dr. Wily's Castle. My answer is different now that Undertale exists, but the point is, even if you're only going to pay the most vapid and shallow lip service to the original music, these two themes from Mega Man 2 are the absolute bare minimum. So, why was my expectation for this episode somehow significantly less than the bare minimum? Mega Man is a series where the music is an enormous part of its identity. If you were to poll Mega Man fans, asking them to list their top 3 favorite things about the series, I can guarantee you that music will be one of, if not the most frequent answer. So why in any timeline would I go into a sincere TV adaptation made for a streaming service expecting something as inseparable from the identity of these games as the soundtracks are to be actively ignored and intentionally neglected? That's a good question. Maybe you should ask Castlevania. In terms of iconic music, Castlevania is very much in a similar boat to Mega Man. If you were to do a similar poll to the one that I proposed for Mega Man fans, but for fans of the Castlevania games, my prediction about how highly valued the music is would stay about the same. Because in general, if you care about the Castlevania game series, then it follows that you care about the music. It has this really cool and distinct blend of classical and baroque music with 80s rock that's so distinctly integral to the core vibe of Castlevania that it would be a stupid, idiotic, downright imbecilic decision that shows no understanding or respect for the original source material to neglect to use or even attempt to emulate any part of the music that the series is so beloved for, wouldn't it? Wouldn't developing an adaptation while harboring such willful disregard for core elements of the source material be bad? But, you may protest, the Netflix Castlevania series did have exactly one fight scene in Season 2 where they played a generic orchestral cover of Bloody Tears that drained the song of all original character and groove in favor of the most vapid and uninspired cinematic epicness TM. That was hype, wasn't it? And sure, I'll give you that. That was neat. Significantly less than the bare minimum effort, and since this is loosely adapting Castlevania 3, beginnings may have been the more appropriate choice, but you know, it's kinda cool. Do you know what else would have been really, really cool? If every single episode was that hype. Imagine for a moment if the entire show, not just the one scene, from the one episode, from the one season, put in that bare minimum effort to be just as almost musically cool. And I don't just mean by plagiarizing the game soundtracks, although I would more than welcome that. But I'd still be really happy if the new music they wrote for this aspired to be anywhere near as distinct and characterful and memorable as the games are, instead of just being the most generic, vague, unmemorable, and identityless orchestral anime slop they could possibly write. This scene here should have been underscored with Mad Forest, which, for those who actually understand Castlevania's musical language, has become Sypha's character theme. Instead, it's underscored by Sypha swearing like a sailor, which is funny because Castlevania 3 already has a sailor in its cast who is not in the show. Grant Dynasty is one of 4 playable characters in Castlevania 3. He is a playable main character. They're adapting an NES game which has only a small handful of named characters to begin with, and they erased one. Worse than erased, actually, they went out of their way to make fun of the very idea of him. Grant is a fixture of the Dracula's Curse crew and deserves respect. Every time these guys are referenced in a summon or in a doppelganger boss fight, Grant is right there alongside Trevor and Sypha. He even joins the full, complete C3 crew in that one weird-ass fighting game for the Wii that gave everybody ugly Death Note redesigns. But despite all that, Grant is still not in the show. Why? Maybe it's because they don't actually care about adapting Castlevania 3. Maybe they just wanted to make their own original edgy goth show where hot shirtless vampire men get covered in blood and swear like Redditors, and Grant just isn't sexy enough for them. Cowards. Like, look at this scene from Season 4. Long after the events of the show have gone off the rails with completely original content not present in the source material, they're making some atheistic evolutionary excuse as to why vampires are weak to crosses when the actual canon answer is literally that the light of God banishes evil. It doesn't matter if the vampires are from India and don't know who Jesus is. They are, according to Castlevania game lore, beings of chaos and darkness, and therefore the light of God is sufficiently effective against them. I'm not asking the writers themselves to convert to any specific religious beliefs. All I'm asking them to do is respect the lore and themes of the source material they're allegedly adapting. And within Castlevania lore, it's canon that God is real. It is canon that God is objectively and absolutely good. Within Castlevania game lore, the church, as an organization, is canonically on the side of God's objective absolute goodness against the forces of objective absolute evil, even if it is still made up of individual human members who are messy, flawed beings susceptible to evil's influence. The games respect and lean into the religious themes present in Bram Stoker's original book. It doesn't always understand them. No, Konami, God's goodness does not require evil to exist in order to be valid. That's from Taoism. That's not the Eastern Orthodox Church the Belmonts work for. I can understand wanting to make a show about vampires that divorces their lore from Dracula's original religious undertones. I can understand wanting to make a show that uses the classic man versus monster framing to convey themes about mankind's own evils, using the monsters here to represent those abandoned or othered by society. Those are all creative choices that I can respect. But if that's the show you wanted to make, why are you adapting Castlevania? Probably because they wanted to grift on the name brand recognition and built-in fanbase, and Konami has no interest in being responsible stewards for their legacy IP. I guess the point of this tangent is that the lack of music from the source material isn't really the cause of my problem with this show, it's a symptom. It's not a bad adaptation because it doesn't have the music. It's more that it doesn't have the music because it's a bad adaptation. Something that show has in common with Sonic the Hedgehog. Look, everyone here probably knows the unexpected Cinderella story of the first Sonic film. How after the first trailer got rightfully strong backlash, the movie got delayed so they could rework Sonic's design to be something that doesn't cause people mental, emotional, and physical harm when they look at it. But that's all that was changed about it. The problem remains that the script they used for that movie was still the exact same script written for this design. A script mandated and approved by the boardroom full of out-of-touch, formula-chasing executives who somehow thought the first design for Sonic was a good idea. And it shows. Let me put it this way. Cute, marketable blue alien CGI life that the movie is named after and that most of the people have come specifically to see despite only taking up half the movie's runtime and focus, gets reverse isekai'd to a live-action Earth despite their source material only ever being animated. They are pursued by the only human character from the source material, who isn't CG here, and has the goal of harvesting them for their power, which is not his original motivation, by the way. They meet a movie original oblivious loser human white guy audience stand-in with a small life and big dreams who is played by the biggest B-list celebrity the budget would allow for. The human buddy engages with the CGI in cute, tame, and inexpensive to animate hijinks while helping them evade their pursuer. Along the way, both parties learn about the power of family and to appreciate the life they have right in front of them. What I was actually summarizing just now is 2011's The Smurfs. The first Sonic film is using the exact same formulaic cartoon to live-action movie blueprint that's been the mediocre standard in Hollywood for 3 decades. The Sonic the Hedgehog movie has more in common with Garfield, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Rocky and Bullwinkle, and Clifford the Big Red Dog than it does with, you know, Sonic the Hedgehog. The sequels do improve. Sonic 2 is significantly closer to what the first one should have been to begin with. It's just held back significantly by, you know, being a sequel to The Smurfs. And Sonic 3 finally starts to feel like it's actually trying to be a proper adaptation of the games. It does still suffer from, once again, the sins of the first movie, but at least the amount of screen time dedicated to content that has absolutely jack squat to do with the source material has been reduced to as near zero as possible. And the funniest thing is, now that we can tell from just the script that the people who actually care about the source material aren't having the creative freedom strangled out of them by oblivious meddling executives, the soundtrack has finally started putting in the bare minimum effort of using honest-to-goodness Sonic music from the actual-ass games. No, Sonic Movie 1, the first 7 notes of Green Hill Zone playing exactly one time, does not count. Sonic is yet another game series defined by its soundtrack. But the movies are indistinguishable from every other young adult or family-friendly action film of the last decade. Honestly, the fact that you can't even say, yeah, it sucked, but at least the music went hard, is a bigger sin against the Sonic brand than having a script that disregards the lore, because, frankly, the lore of Sonic between the shows, comics, and games is all over the place. Even though Sonic 3's soundtrack is definitely better than the first two, I will say it's not all the way to being good yet. I applaud the decision to turn the main guitar riff of Live and Learn into a leitmotif for Shadow, inspired choice. And the subtle use of some of the score from Sonic 06 is also really cool, but it still falls far short of giving the whole movie the soundtrack it deserves. Again, I don't just want them to plagiarize music from the games, although adapting SA2 while only having a vague, passing, easily missable reference to City Escape is downright criminal, but the entire rest of the original soundtrack just lacks Sonic's sauce. Now, Sonic doesn't just have one single musical vibe. Sonic's music is as varied and diverse as the games are, ranging from funky 16-bit jazz to bombastic orchestra to edgy 2000s butt rock. And the movie's original scores entirely fail to capture any part of that broad musical spectrum for 2 whole movies and for 80% of the third one. And even the few times it does lock in and attempt to deliver, they keep finding some way to make it unsatisfying. Like, this moment where Sonic and Shadow join forces and go super and wreck shop should go super hard. It does go hard, but then it keeps cutting back to Jim Carrey spanking himself with a CGI Spy Kids glove, as though they're insecure about letting the pure Sonic hype breathe and have its own space to just be, without injecting the meme bait Jim Carreyisms that the closer these movies get to being a good representation of the games, the more and more he feels out of place as Eggman. Yeah, I'm full of spicy takes today. Plus, the rendition of Live and Learn that they use is heavily edited, adds a ton of orchestral elements, and is mixed in a way that kinda washes out the vocals and guitars too much for my liking. You may try to make the argument that they had to mix Live and Learn like that to make it fit better into the movie's soundtrack. It would be jarring and take people out of the experience if they used the original mix of a non-orchestral song that clashes with the rest of the score. But I'm sorry, that entire line of argument, no matter how you phrase it, holds absolutely no water whatsoever. Because do you know what else would be jarring and take me out of the experience and would clash with the rest of the score? But they did it anyway, and nobody cares?
My finger is on the button. push that button.
Randomly, in the middle of the movie, we are treated to a full, unbroken 1 minute and 4 seconds of Eggman and Gerald dancing to Galvanized by the Chemical Brothers. Why is it that when it comes to using music from the source material for the sake of pure hype fan service that fans want to see on the big screen, they have to cut it up and mess with the mix? But then, when Jim Carrey wants to selfishly co-opt chunks of the film to indulge in his niche music tastes in scenes scientifically engineered for TikTok edits, they bend over backwards to make it happen. Don't get me wrong, these scenes are fun, but they only prove to me that in the hierarchy of Paramount's priorities, channeling the chaotic 90s Jim Carrey energy is more important to them than channeling the source material they're supposed to be adapting. Another thing more important to them than referencing Sonic games seems to be referencing Sonic memes. Seriously, how do we not have City Escape, but we do have Shadow Loves Latinas? You know, if you could all do me a really big favor, well, like and subscribe and stuff, I suppose, for one thing, but more importantly, could everybody just agree to lean really hard into the Metal Sonic memes for the next couple years? It feels like the only way we've got any shot of getting Sonic CD music represented in Metal and Amy's debut film is to trick the filmmakers into thinking they're referencing a meme. And I need a chase sequence set to the Stardust Speedway Bad Future JP in Sonic 4, or else it's literally a 0 out of 10. They failed their one job. Okay, so it's not their only job. We also need to hear What I'm Made Of when they fight Metal's final form. Sonic needs to say his OVA Strange Isn't It line. And before he truly retires as the character, I need Jim Carrey's Eggman to say the phrase,
"Snooping as usual, I see."
They had the Sonic drawing. They had someone show Knuckles the way. We need
Pingers
before it's too late. But only if they get everything else right first. Because those kinds of references are fun icing on top of a complete cake. But if the cake is a lie, and the frosting is all the substance we get, it's just gonna make me sick. It's less insulting in 3, because it's only a cute sideways reference if you squint that doesn't come at the expense of Shadow's character being as game accurate as the unfortunately crippled filmverse would allow for. Similarly, I might enjoy these Jim Carrey dance scenes if the rest of the movie did deliver on adapting the core of Sonic's musical vibe in a satisfying way. Or maybe I wouldn't, because I'm still mad at Illumination for randomly adding Take On Me by a-ha to Mario. The Super Mario Bros. Movie is a great example of a video game movie managing to capture the musical character of the source material. But even it isn't immune to the Hollywood executives' crippling addiction to copying formulaic slop. Like, ever since Shrek, pop culture references and pop music became a cornerstone in every major animated kids movie for upwards of 2 decades, whether it belongs there or not. I don't blame Shrek itself. I blame every studio executive ever looking at Shrek's success and learning the incorrect lessons from it. They don't see an earnest film that breaks the mold and forges its own identity, using its irreverent pop culture and music references to juxtapose and make commentary on the, at the time, overplayed formula from the Disney Renaissance. They instead saw a far simpler formula. Pop music plus pop culture references equal $signs. And that's why Illumination, the most money-chasing and hopelessly formula-addicted studio out there, couldn't help but add Take On Me to the Mario movie. And Thunderstruck. And Holding Out for a Hero, and No Sleep Till Brooklyn, and Mr. Blue Sky, and that one song from Carmen. And we almost had Jump by Van Halen in this film, but Brian Tyler fought tooth and nail to keep the original Starman Invincibility theme intact, which was objectively the best decision for this story moment, and I don't see how anyone could think otherwise. But I've also still gotta pour one out for driving me bananas. You will be missed. Man, I may have my reservations about that live-action Zelda movie they're cooking up, but at the very least, because of the mere fact it isn't animated, I don't have to worry about Link riding into battle set to Fortunate Son. And if Shigeru Miyamoto and Koji Kondo ominously breathe down the composer's neck again like they did with Mario, we might just have the best adventure movie soundtrack since Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End on our hands. But again, I don't think the Mario movie's soundtrack is good just because it copies from the games. Even when it's using new music written for the film, it still manages to capture a similar Mario brand of bouncy fun. This film's main theme, an original motif written by Brian Tyler, wouldn't feel out of place in a Mario game. Which helps, because then they can seamlessly integrate the new score written for the movie with the music from the games, and it's not jarringly out of place. And honestly, I keep making qualifying statements about this, but is straight up plagiarizing music from the games actually such a bad thing? Video games are an interactive audio-visual medium after all, And film is also an audiovisual medium. This isn't like a book-to-film adaptation, where there's a lot of room for creative expression and how certain elements translate to the screen. Books don't have soundtracks or sound design. That's just a fact about the medium. It's not a bad thing. It's just something uniquely different about the written word as a medium. What books do have is a tone and vibes that need to be evoked in the film's use of its unique assets. But when translating a story from one audiovisual medium to another audiovisual medium, the existing work will already have an established identity in both its visuals and its audio. So it would only be respectful to try and preserve that as best as they can, right? Nobody gives book adaptations flack for lifting lines of dialogue directly from the source text. The Nutcracker is a classic children's ballet production with music written by the composer Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. It's a work that has been adapted to film and television innumerable times. And a ballet, a work of musical theater, is by its nature an audiovisual medium. And as a result, even the worst adaptations of the story still at the very least cling to Tchaikovsky's original compositions because that is the musical identity intrinsic to the Nutcracker. Now, that's also probably because the music and story are in the public domain, so the studio doesn't need to pay any royalties. But if you're adapting a video game, you're already paying for the likeness of the characters in the story. How much more would it realistically be to license the music? Is it really so much that it's worth it to be a less satisfying and definitive adaptation for fans? Does it cost that much more than licensing all the pop music you're forcing into these films to appeal to the masses who, let's be real, probably would show up anyway if the marketing and reviews are good, with or without the forced trendiness? On the topic of Tchaikovsky, when Walt Disney decided to make an animated version of the classic fairy tale Sleeping Beauty, he further decided to use music written by Tchaikovsky for his ballet adaptation of the same story. Was it because he was lazy? Was it because he wanted people in the theater to Leonardo DiCaprio at the screen every time he made a shallow reference to distract from the fact that the script had no respect for the source material whatsoever? Or, rather, was it because he wanted to craft an iconic and definitive version of this story in his new medium, and so he made the artistic decision to draw inspiration from the musical vocabulary that had been intrinsically linked to this story in cultural consciousness for 69 years? And maybe the dumbest thing about this game and movie relationship is how biased and one-sided it is. Because when a game goes about adapting the world or events of a film or series, more often than not, the devs try to capture the spirit of the original by making it sound as authentic as possible. Whenever you play a Star Wars game, if they're not recreating or straight up lifting the original recordings from the official score, they at least do their level best to channel John Williams' orchestral style in the new music that they write. Imagine for a moment if this kind of scenario were reversed. Imagine if a game was adapting the events of Star Wars I: The Phantom Menace, and the time came to score the final confrontation with Darth Maul. The movie already has Duel of the Fates, which is pretty much the cinematic equivalent of a final boss theme. And even the biggest prequel haters out there have to admit it's straight fire and probably the best part of the film. But in this reversed alternate reality, the game developers are so ashamed and insecure about how seriously people will be able to take them because they're adapting something as unworthy of respect as a movie, so instead of using the clear and obvious, objectively correct choice, they instead license The Final Countdown by Europe. Wouldn't that be stupid? Sonic the Hedgehog 2? Wouldn't that be dumb? Super Mario Bros. Movie? I'm not 100% against the use of licensed pop music in game-to-film adaptations, particularly if it's already part of the series' musical language like it is with Fallout. But that's just it, isn't it? A good adaptation should draw from the established musical language of whatever it's adapting first and foremost. Sometimes, that musical language comes with licensed popular music. Heck, sometimes that musical language consists mostly of fan-made songs, because it took a while for Five Nights at Freddy's to actually start employing a repertoire of actual music within the games themselves. And the movie was cool for having the living tombstone in the credits. I do still want to hear 240 bits per mile play at some point in those movies, though. There are still lots of examples of movies and shows that do make good musical adaptation decisions. There are several anime that, no, Castlevania, you're not an anime, you're painfully American. Go! Get out of here. Shoot. You too, Devil May Cry. Anyway, Persona is jazzy. Dragon Quest has the iconic overture, and both Ace Attorney's anime and live-action movie both draw from the original iconic game soundtracks. But maybe that's just because Japanese animation studios are more likely to have actual respect for the Japanese game developers and their works than Hollywood does. And bringing this back around to Mega Man, I guess, somehow for all the weird, baffling choices they made for that one fully charged cartoon from 2018, they actually used the original Robot Master themes in the fight scenes, which is kinda cool, even if it's pretty much the only cool thing this show does. How does this one weird-ass show that barely survived development hell only manage to make this exactly one halfway decent adaptation decision, while some of the most lauded and successful adaptations with actual budgets to work with fumble that exact point so hard and get a free pass for it? It doesn't seem fair. So, I said a lot of things, but what am I actually saying? Well, for one, I'm tired of film adaptations that are just grifting on an IP to reach an established audience while trying to force their own narratives into a work that it doesn't fit in, and sometimes even goes against if you look anywhere beyond the most surface of levels, or when they just mindlessly force a formula onto an IP like a square peg into a round hole. And this isn't just a game-to-film thing, it's a problem with movies in general in the current year. I'm also tired of film adaptations that seem almost ashamed to leverage the established and beloved musical vocabulary of whatever they're trying to adapt, and instead they wash out the background with bland music that has no distinct identity for itself. Again, it particularly annoys me when going from game to film, but it's also a much wider problem I have with movies in general. And finally, even if something is good, great, or has gotten better, even if I personally like it, that doesn't make it immune to criticism. I enjoyed some of the movies and shows I talked about or alluded to today, but just because I like it doesn't mean I have to ignore or defend the bad or at least questionable decisions they've made. And by that same token, me calling out poor or weak choices doesn't mean I'm attacking you personally for liking it anyway. If you think Netflixvania's use of music is acceptable, you're allowed to have that opinion. Although I would appreciate it if next time you form an opinion, you would actually play a Castlevania game first. Okay, that was mean. I'm sorry, I'll stop now. I already snuck the call to action in the middle, so all that's left is, okay, love you, bye.